We'll be looking at the quadratic formula today. So if we review just very briefly here, when we have an equation that looks like this, we can solve it a few ways. If it's missing a bx term, we can solve for x. But if it does have an x term and an x squared term, we could try to factor and use a zero product property. But sometimes things aren't factorable, so we've looked at graphing and looking at the x-intercepts. Those are your solutions. Well, today we do the fourth and final method, and that's the quadratic formula. So the quadratic formula works no matter how many terms you have in that quadratic equation. It works whether or not it's factorable, and you don't have to make a huge table. However, that said, that is the quadratic formula. So it's not the tiniest formula you've ever seen, but it works, and we'll learn how to use it and be able to get solutions here with it in a second. So this will give us the roots, zeros, or also known as the solutions. By the way, there's a plus or minus part here. That's going to give us two solutions if the graph crosses the x-axis in two places. So we will have to do a little split, we call it, here in a little bit. So the steps are going to be to make sure it's written in standard form and set equal to 0. We're going to identify our A, B, and C, just like we've been doing. And then we're going to substitute those values into the quadratic formula right here. So there's our template. So here our A is 2, B is -5, C is -25. So think of this as the opposite of B, just like we've been doing to get the x value of our vertex, opposite of B. So our B is -5, the opposite of B is +5. Then we have a plus or minus, then a square root sign. Then we do B, but we square it now, and especially if your B value is negative here, you have to use parentheses, because really the trick here, folks, is with this b squared term, no matter what number you're squaring, it will become positive. And if you forget to use parentheses in your calculator, it's going to tell you it's negative. It'll throw the whole thing off. So once you square things, which I did over here, you should always see a positive number for this first term in the square root. Then to that, we add a -4. So over here, I added the opposite. The technical formula, when you look it up, is going to be -4 times A times C. I find students are more successful when they write plus -4 times A times C. So plus a -4 times A is 2, C is -25, divided by 2 times A. And in this case, our A was 2. So everything's substituted in. The first thing you're really going to work at is when we follow our order of operations, we're going to work on exponents, and really square rooting is the same power level as squaring. It's essentially an exponent. It's something raised to the 1/2. So work within that square root symbol. And so you get, we'll square here within the square root, so we get 25. And then we have to multiply all this together underneath the square root symbol. So you multiply all that together, and we'll keep on working underneath the square root. After you square and multiply, now you add those answers, and so now you get the square root of one number. Square root that one number, square root of 225 is 15. And now we have this plus or minus. Before we can divide, folks, we do have to clean up the top and the bottom. So here the top needs to get simplified a little bit, but there's this, do we add them or subtract them? Well, we add them to get one answer, and we subtract them to get the other answer. So 5 plus 15 is 20. Now divide that by 4. One solution is 5. 5 minus 15 is -10. -10 divided by 4 is -2.5. And then you could write those two solutions in your fancy pants brackets. There we are. Let's try this. So write the equation in standard form. It is. Now we're going to identify our A, B, and C. So A is 2, b is 4, c equals negative 6. So we do the opposite of b, negative 4 plus or minus the square root of, the square root of 4 squared plus negative 4, right, plus a negative 4 times 2 times negative 6, all divided by 2 times a. So we get negative 4, I'll change colors here, negative 4 plus or minus 16, 4 squared 16, plus, now here we're multiplying three numbers together. If you have an even number of negatives, a negative times a negative is a positive. So check this in your calculator. When you multiply this together, you should get a positive, and you get 48. Positive 48 divided by 4. So we get negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 64 divided by 4. So now we do the split. And I'm not sure space-wise how you're going to be able to do that. I think I was able to keep going across the notes paper, but it's not fitting here. So negative 4 plus the square root of 64 is 8. And we'll divide that by 4. So we get 4 divided by 4, which equals 1. I'm going to circle that. And then I'll subtract it. Negative 4 minus 8 divided by 4. So that's negative 12 divided by 4, which equals negative 3. So my solutions are 1 and negative 3. Next one. It's in standard form and it's set equal to 0. So A is 6, B is negative 8, and C is 2. So we do the opposite of B, which is now positive 8 plus or minus the square root of, my square root's always tail down. It's because I'm tired, my hand can't stay up. So we do b squared, negative 8 in parentheses squared, plus negative 4, add the opposite, plus negative 4 times 6 times negative 2. Now again here we have a negative times a negative, divided by 2 times a, which is 6. So we get 8 plus or minus the square root of 64 plus, multiplying these together you get 48 divided by 12 equals 8 plus or minus the square root of 100, just kidding, 112. Did you catch Mr. P's mistake? I think I made a crappy equal, excuse me, I think I made a bad equal sign here. It's C equals 2. But since I was missing the second part of the equal sign, I thought it was a negative 2. So I put in a negative 2 for C. That's supposed to be a positive 2. So that's just a multiplication dot. So now we don't have two negatives. We have negative 4 times 6 times 2. We have an odd number of negatives, so that's a negative 48. And so then we get 16 there, divided by 12. And the square root of 16 is 4. So we have 8 plus or minus 4, all divided by 12. So now we can split it. We'll have 8 plus 4 divided by 12, which equals 1, and 8 minus 4 divided by 12, which equals 4 over 12, which is the same as 1/3. So our solutions are 1, 1/3.